If you weren't here in the orientation, my name is Paul Tilley, and I'm the instructor for this course. And this is a 5-module course that is all about taking you from a tradesperson to someone who has some management skills within your trade. So it's good to be able to use these tools for two reasons. First of all, to advance your career and to manage other people in the workplace. And second of all, potentially to start your own business. The first topic that we're dealing with is human resource management. Human resource management. And what we're doing tonight is the very first topic within human resource management, which is allocating human resources. And really, if we think about human resources is all about people. If we think of the name that we call businesses, we call them organizations. And why do we call it organization? If you think about the word means to organize a group of people to achieve some common goal. So an organization is really nothing more than a group of people who are brought together with a singular purpose to achieve some particular goal. Really good organizations do a very good job at that. Okay. So in order to be able to move your organization forward, you have to have an understanding of how organizations can be set up and how we can get the most out of them. So we can get most out of the scarce resources that we put into an organization in order to get the most benefit. The very first thing that we're looking at is this term of organizational structure. Now, I don't know how many of you have had any experience in organizations to any great extent, but if you've ever worked anywhere, you should have some reasonable knowledge of this concept of a structure. The very fact that you had a boss or you were managing some other people meant that the organization had a structure. Certain people are responsible for certain things. And that's really what we mean by organizational structure in the broadest sense. So if we think about most small businesses, most small businesses are in the role where they say, oh, okay, well, there's you and me, or just me, and I manage myself. I'm the only person to manage, or only have one person to manage. So organizations start off generally very simply. That is, no real organizational structure at all, because you are, or the two of you, or the three of you are the organizational structure. The buck stops with you. You get to make all the decisions. You get the benefits that come from good decisions, and you get the problems that result from not so good decisions. As your organization grows, and that's the trick. As an organization grows, that structure of you running the show or you telling people what to do doesn't necessarily work anymore. The structure and somebody else, are they connected? Do you have a good handle on what everybody is doing? And that leads to problems in an organization. When you hire someone, for example, and bring them in and you give them certain roles and responsibilities, if they're not clear on what their role and responsibility is, who's to say they're ever going to do it? And from their perspective, is it fair for you to ask them to do something and think they know they have responsibility to do something when they really don't? So creating this structure helps the organization from a management point of view to be able to say, okay, you're responsible for this. And from an employee's point of view, to ensure that the employee is very familiar with what their role is and what they need to do and how they fit within the organization to achieve that overall goal. So really what you need to do whenever you think about organizational structures, think about an organization that you have worked in or you've been in, and think about this concept of structure within it. Who was your boss? Were there other bosses? Were there departments? Was there a number of groupings of employees who did common tasks or were located in common areas? How was it set up? And really, for your own organization, if you want it to start an organization or you're working in a very small organization, does it have a structure? Should it have a structure? What are the benefits of structure? And are we just complicating it, or are the benefits greater than the complications? That's really some of the questions that I want you to ask yourself with regards to this topic. First and foremost, probably the most important thing that any formal organization structure does is it should clarify the communications. And that's important as an organization grows, is being able to communicate with the employees so that you can tell them what they need to do, but also they know how to tell you what some of their challenges are. So the flow, the two-way flow of communication should flow through an organized structure, meaning you know who to talk to with regards to the challenges that you're having, and they would have to know who to talk to with regards to who can solve their problems that they're encountering. So this communication linkage is clarified when we have a clear organizational structure that everybody should be familiar with. It also provides a clear definition of roles and responsibilities. You and I have probably been in enough organizations now to know that sometimes things don't get done because nobody was allocated the role of doing it. You know, it's ideas are great, but unless you say to someone, "Hey, you're the person responsible for that now, and I want you to be the one to get that done and report back to us when it's done." That sort of thing is what comes with the structure. It clearly defines whose role it is to do what the responsibility is, and the accountability of that. If it doesn't get done, well, who's at fault? So organizational structure helps do that. It defines a clear chain of command too. You know, when you have an organizational structure, who your boss is. You know who you're responsible for managing. And in management, just as a general management philosophy, you can only have one boss. You can't have multiple bosses. Organizations need to be set up so that there is one boss who tells you what the tasks are to be done. You can't have two people telling you different tasks because that's going to lead to problems for yourself. First of all, you'll never be able to manage. You'll be pulled in many different directions. And second of all, from the organizational point of view, one person's going to say, "I thought you were doing that. I thought you were doing that." It never got done. So you run into these situations. So a clear channel of communications and a clear structure helps eliminate that problem. Structure, too, also helps the organization to operate efficiently. Let's say, for example, you are an electrician, okay, or you're a mechanic. You know your job. I have no doubt that you know your job well. I know nothing about electricians, electrical. I've gotten a few shocks, but I know nothing about it. Be the first to admit. I know a little bit enough about mechanical things to be dangerous, but I'm not an expert at that. When we have an organizational structure, a machinist or a millwright or a carpenter clearly defines what that person does. Okay, if you think about the role of trades in general, trades generally, the name itself identifies what the person does. Okay, so the carpenter assembles and cuts wood. A heavy duty mechanic or a millwright will be responsible for machines, big parts, mechanical things. An electrician will be responsible for the electrical. They have their requisite skills in each of those, and they can make sure the job gets done better. So again, clear structure helps put that into place. You don't have someone like me going in and trying to cut the wood because I'm not an expert carpenter. I won't be able to do as good a job as you if you're an expert carpenter. So clearly defining who does what is good. And it makes the organization run efficiently. The responsibility is there too, and we can't overstress that. It clearly defines who does what and who's responsible for what. So if I, for example, am the manager, my job is to manage. My job is not to actually do the work. And that often gets gray, especially in small organizations where you don't have enough people to do specific tasks. And that also results in the challenges of that because, who's responsible for doing it? As organizations get bigger, we can more easily specialize and clarify those tasks. One of the things, too, from an entrepreneurial point of view or a small business point of view, if you have a clear organizational structure, you will know how many people you're going to have to do the work. Let's say, for example, we have an organization that is doing general maintenance work. Let's assume this is our organization and we're responsible for doing maintenance. Well, we need a carpenter and we need an electrician and we need someone who's a janitor. Okay, those are 3 roles. Well, if we have that type of business, we will clearly identify that we need 3 people with 3 different skill sets in order to do those tasks. Again, it won't be wishy-washy. We'll know exactly who we need to do what. So it helps do those sorts of things as well. There are tried and tested methods of setting up businesses that have been established. And they tend to be called organizational structures. They tend to fall in 4 categories, okay? 2 major ones and 2 minor ones. The 2 major ones is something called a functional organizational structure and a divisional organizational structure. The remaining 2, the matrix organizational structure and the flat organizational structure, are really built out of those first 2. So if you understand the first 2, the rest and all the permutations that are out there are really subgroups of those first 2. So let's take a look at first at the functional structure. And I think you'll be very aware of the functional structure. If we look at the functional structure breaks people down by what they do. Now, for us that work in the college, you guys that are working in the college is set up very much by a functional work structure, okay? For example, in the college, internally, we have staff and we have instructors. You tend to fall in one of those 2 categories. So that's very clearly functional, isn't it? And we can also think about even within the functions are going to be subdivided into the various trades or the various programs within the college. So, for example, welding, machinists, and engineering design would be 3 programs at the college. And you could see it in this particular little graphic, what I've got put up. This, by the way, is called an organizational chart. You will see the functional structure outlined. In an organizational chart, what an organizational chart does is it shows the people and the positions within the place. Okay, so we got the owner manager, Fred Arnott, in our example here. That's at the top. That's where the buck stops. That's the head person. First, the head person is always at the top. Below and off to the side, meaning it's not a direct link into the operation. There is an executive assistant. Below that, there are 3 groups that are defined by their function. The welders, there's 2 welders, Simon and Fred, work in the welding group. Sometimes we call it the welding department. Maybe it's the welding room. Maybe it's the welding shop, whatever. The machinists, we have 2 machinists, and they're geared up in the machine shop or the machine shop area. And the designers, and they're set up. So you can see that the roles are very clearly defined here by function. Now, we also, with the lines that fall in between, if we look at the lines here that fall in between, the lines clearly define who's responsible to whom, okay? So Victoria here, the executive assistant, blows up to the owner manager, Fred. But she is not directly in the operations or the organization. She is an assistant too. She helps it out on the side, facilitates this person doing their work. The welders would be responsible for reporting to Fred. Fred's going to tell the welders what to do, as he will with the machinists, as he will with the designers. This structure could grow much larger as the organization grows, where we, for example, could have a head welder. So let's assume that Simon is designated as the head welder. And the other welders, let's assume there are more, would report to Simon. Simon, in turn, would report to Fred. Same thing here. We could have a lead person who would be responsible, and a lead person here would be responsible, and the people under them would report to that head person. So we can see that this type of organizational structure is pretty common in our world, and really the major advantage is it creates a very clear reporting relationship. Who's responsible for whom and what is the job that you do. And you can clearly see that in a functional structure. It's a common structure. A second type of structure that's very common is something called the divisional structure. And usually divisional structures occur as an organization gets bigger. Okay. And you could think of, for example, here we have a organization that is a plumbing shop. And the plumbing shop could have two different divisions. We'll call it the commercial division, which is responsible for commercial activities, corporate work, and a residential division, which is responsible for going into people's homes and doing these sorts of things. Again, set up very similar to the functional structure, but what we're doing there is we're breaking it down by what they do in terms of to their customer, who's the customers they deal with. So the commercial division deals with the commercial grouping, whereas a residential deals with a residential grouping. Again, the line of chain of command or the line of authority is clearly laid out. The owner, Harry Arnott, is responsible for everything. He is the head guy. They have an executive assistant. The executive assistant is not directly involved in the chain, but assists. So again, they sit off to the side there. Now they're responsible to Harry Arnott, who is ultimately the boss. The commercial division then is responsible to Harry, as is the residential division. And within each of those divisions, there are various workers. And as I say, just like in the functional structure, if the commercial division is large enough, or if the residential division is large enough, we could have a head person within a middle manager, we'll call them, within the commercial division or within the residential division. So these two structures, be it functional or organizational, are good ways to organize a business. It really depends on the type of business, what works best. The matrix structure is something that came up probably about 30 years ago, where someone asked that very same question that you asked: is can we come up with some sort of a hybrid structure that does both? And this matrix structure is really doing this to some degree of success, but it depends on the type of organization. Okay, not all organizations need a really strong structure, and the reason is if you got professional people who know what they're doing. If you're a professional tradesperson, for example, you know your job. You don't need someone looking over your shoulder telling you what to do. However, other organizations that may not, like McDonald's, where you have a bunch of kids coming in to work you can't have unskilled labor really clearly defining what they want to do. It will just be anarchy. So it depends on the organization. In some organizations, they come up with a organizational structure. They tend to be larger and they tend to be more professional organizations. Here's an example of this. And really what it is, it's an organization broken into subparts. And we've seen this type of structure being used out there in the world. What we have a company that's large enough to have an owner. And like in the functional structure, we have welders, machinists, and designers. Okay, just like so. This top part here is very much a functional structure. That those top couple of levels with the executive assistant. What we've done though is we have incorporated a divisional structure into it, depending on the work. So you could see this, for example, if you're a company like this welding company that I've got here, or this mechanical company, they could have a Hibernia project group, a Hebron project group, and a White Rose project group. Maybe those three groups are physically separate from one another. One's located in Argentia, the other one's located in Bull Arm, and so on. So what we've done in this case is we've got functions and divisions. So the question is, and I just want to pick on Simon LeBron here in the welders group. Simon is a welder, and if there's a boss in the welders group, let's assume that there is someone designate the head welder, then Simon is responsible to that person. let's assume the Hibernia project has a head person too. This project group has a head person. Simon's wondering, do I report to the head welder or do I report to the Hibernia project group head? That can create some stress for Simon, right? So Simon needs to be really, really, really clear, and the organization needs to be really, really clear of who's captaining the ship. Is the welder boss the top boss, or is the project group boss the top boss? Who makes the final decision? Who is the person that's accountable? The matrix structure is happening a lot in some organizations, as I say, that are big enough and diverse enough to allow this sort of thing to happen. But again, it runs the risk. It runs the risk that the employees end up with a dual reporting relationship and just don't know who they're responsible to and maybe getting mixed messages from their employer. A flat organizational structure really is the modern organization. It was really, popular, or it was trendy. I'll call it trendy. And in a flat organization, there is no boss. Okay, everybody's on the same level. The office manager, the welder, the machinist, the designer, they're all equal partners in trying to get something done. So you argue, who are they responsible to? Well, they're responsible to one another. That's really how it works. Now, if the organization is small and pretty tight together, professional people, that might work. You've got 4 partners, and for example, one is a business person, the other one is a welder, the other one's a machinist, the other one's a designer, and they all are good friends. They all work well together, and that could work as a flat organizational structure. But as that organization grows, it makes it difficult to manage the group. The primary advantage of a flat structure is that you don't have this big long chain of command that, you can't talk to, you got to talk to them, they got to talk to that one, and that, bureaucracy basically. This one eliminates bureaucracy. Let's go over to Fred's office and solve the problem. It's simple. It's great. It's a wonderful, idealistically based process of everybody's on the same level. There is no boss. We all work as a team. It's really a team-based design, right? The thing is that once the organization grows large, it's very difficult to manage a large group of people where everyone has authority for everything. Got this little short video here on this.
Organizational structure. Businesses can be very complex organizations with many hundreds or thousands of people working in them in many different roles. In order to manage their resources effectively, businesses must have clear organizational structures in place. Organizational structures include the different relationships between people in an organization. For example, in some cases, an employer might want to have a formal relationship between people in the organization, or in others, it might be more relaxed. This happens in everyday life too. Think about any organization that you're a part of. Do you call the other people by their first names? Do you call them by their title? What about the other members themselves? Do they call each other Mrs. D, Dr. X, or Mr. M? Or do they refer to each other by their first names? How do they refer to the person leading the organization? Different business are referred to as hierarchies. Hierarchy occurs where people are given some sort of title or rank that signifies their importance in the organization. All businesses have employees working at different levels of. A business depends on its operatives to produce the products or services. Team leaders often perform the day-to-day management role, with managers setting direction and strategy for the business role. The number of employees in each level will depend on the business's organizational structure. It is important to determine who takes responsibility for decision making, who and blame when things mess up, or who gets the pat on the back if things go well. There are 3 typical organizational structures. They are known as hierarchical, flat, and matrix. Hierarchical structure is typical in large companies, where each level of employee reports upwards a narrow span of control. The downside of this type of structure is that it leads to significantly slower communication and decision making. A flat organizational structure has much less levels of hierarchy and wider spans of control. This means employees at each level can communicate with managers more easily and quickly. However, this usually means that workers take more responsibility for decision making. The benefits of this are that it may encourage a more dedicated and motivated workforce. Typically, this type of structure is used in small businesses and startups. The structure is that it allows the business to change rapidly, market, customer, or competitor. However, this only applies if the staff are well trained and are actually capable of making the changes. Lastly, a matrix structure gathers employees who hold the relevant expertise in order to help the business goals. The people selected come from different levels and departments within the structure can be used in both hierarchical and flat organizations and are typically used for specific projects. Team members may come from different parts of the business, regardless of their usual location in the hierarchy. Obviously, once a project is over, the matrix will be disbanded.
So if we think about the design elements for an organizational structure, helping you choose, what type of organizational structure is best for your organization. Well, the fact of the matter is, it depends. It ultimately depends. There's no one best structure that works best. And as we have seen, as you evolve your business, the organizational structure may want to change. So some of the basic questions that we really need to answer before we ever design an organizational structure is, how are the jobs divided? Who does what? What type of organization am I dealing with here? So we really got the organizations that have employees that actually do the work, organizations that have managers of those people or middle managers. Do we have that in our organization? Is there an owner? Are there multiple owners? Is there board of directors? These sorts of things. And that's going to affect how things are best set up. So you need to take a look and say, who does what in our business? Who's responsible for what? That's the first thing. Figure out that division of labor. Then you ask yourself, well, is the business really big enough for departments? Do functionality work? Do we have enough machinists or enough pipe fitters or enough carpenters in order to be able to create a departmental type structure? Maybe if we don't, then probably the departmental structure is not the best one to pick. How can we manage people? We think about this, how many people can one person manage? And we talk about this span of control was talked about in the video there. Can you manage 100 people? Can you manage 10? Can you manage 1,000? What's manageable? And we need to think about in our structure, how big should a group be that is responsible to one person? You can't have a group that's too big. So you need to be able to think, and it really depends on the organization, depends on the nature of employees, a lot of things that come into that decision. But you got to think, how many people can you deal with? How many people can you manage? And probably another thing that you want to look at from an up and down point of view is, how many layers do you want? Do you want top manager, a middle manager, a sub-middle manager, floor shop manager? Do we have so many managers that we got as many managers as employees? So we need to think, how big is the organization? How many people? And what are the benefits and the downside? Again, we talked about the span of control. You want to limit the span of control, so you need more managers. That increases the number of managers. But then the other side is, the more managers you have and the more levels you have, the slower communications is in the business. If it flows up through the organization and down through the organization, then there's 20 layers. It's like that old game that we used to play, as kids, where I told you something, then the person goes and tells the person next, then the person goes and and by the time it gets around the circle, it's a totally different story. So we can imagine miscommunication occurring as an organization has too many layers of management. So we gotta be mindful of that when we're designing an organization. So what I've asked you to do in the first assignment, the first discussion activity I'd like you to submit, is to consider the organizational structures discussed here tonight. Imagine that you've established a business. Develop an organizational structure for your business. So you get to choose what type of business it is, and you get to choose how many people work for it or how many people are in it. And all I want you to do is think about okay, tell me your scenario. I have a business with 20 employees and we do this, this, and this. This is the structure that I see working for this. That's sort of what I'm gearing at there. Could be a fairly small organization consisting of 5 people. Could be an organization consisting of 50 people. It really doesn't matter. It's just how you want to organize it and a rationale why you're organizing it that way. Okay? And that, as I say, a couple or 3 paragraphs is more than adequate for that. The second thing I'd like to look at within this topic is I want to take it from an entrepreneurial perspective, okay? And that is, you're the manager. You're the person. So what are your roles and responsibility at the top, okay? At that top in terms of what is it you need to do? Well, as a manager, you need to wear many hats. You have to be sort of like an idea person. You have to be a business planner. You have to be a human resource specialist. You're wearing many hats. You're doing a role of thinking and planning, but you're also doing the hand holding, the human resource specialist. So you got that sort of thing that you need to do. You need to have some idea of marketing, and you think about any job you do. And I use the word marketing, and probably that might be a little bit too much of a technical word, but you have to think about who's going to buy this product that you're planning on making, or how do you deal with the customer, and how do you keep the customer happy? What are some of the concerns that a customer has that you need to bring to your role to say, how can I address it? Like, for example, when I build my organizational structure, I want to make sure I put people who are good people persons in the frontline jobs, so that these are the people that are dealing with the customer. I want to make sure that those people are located there, and keep the people who aren't so good at that but have other attributes somewhere within the organization doing some of the roles there. Again, all part of the designing of the organization. You think of your role too as manager. You need to be a bookkeeper, an accountant. It's fine to say let's have 50 positions to do all the role, but if you're only generating $50,000 a year in revenue, having 50 positions just doesn't make any sense, right? It's just, you're not going to be doing that very long before you run out of money. So you have to think about, whenever you're designing a matrix or a functional or departmental structure, how much money do you have? What kind of budget you got here? If an average person is going to cost you $50,000 a year to have, and you're only doing $200,000 worth of sales, you really need to think that you don't have a capacity to hire any more than 3 or 4 people. So how does that work? So you need to have an appreciation for dollars and cents and the finances of your business. And that's actually something we're going to look at in one of the modules in this program. And as I say, this marketing expert kind of flows into the customer service person. Is that the right person? So as a business, as a boss, or as a manager, or someone who's in the process of owning a business, who is at the top of the business or near the top of the business, you need to have the various attributes that are defined here. These attributes, not everybody's going to be really good at every one of these, okay? You're not going to find someone who's really good at it. But a manager's job is to have the overview and to be able to get the right people that do have the skills in these various things. So you need to have some ability to appreciate, I'll call it, these various things. And another thing that's important that you need to be aware of too is that if you're an entrepreneur, okay, you're designing a business, you're probably not the world's best manager. Just like I could flip it around and say, if you're a manager, you're probably not world's best entrepreneur. And the reason is it seems to be that the attributes that an entrepreneur have are slightly different than the attributes that a manager has. An entrepreneur is someone who comes up with ideas and really makes them real, okay, moves them along. A manager's job is more to do with the operations. So once the business is up and running, then that person needs to be able to manage it in terms of the people skills and the planning skills and these sorts of things. So it's important to know that different people have different sets of skills. Some people are more entrepreneurial, get things going. Some people are more managerial. And what you find is a lot of entrepreneurs who start a business, for example, will eventually sell that business because they're not very good managers. And some people who are better managers end up buying businesses from entrepreneurs. So these are kind of, all the major components here. And I say, like driving a car with a standard transmission, growing a business requires you to change gears as you move along. One challenge that a lot of entrepreneurs may have is this transitional role from a business creator to a business manager. Many managers require a very different skill set. So you got to think about when if you're an entrepreneurial bent into this, if you're thinking, I'd like to start my own business, you often are going to say, yeah, I got some of these skills, but I don't have all of them. And one of the things that you want to do in your business when you start it is to think about what can you do in order to deficiencies is not the word, but what can you do in order to hire people that help build up your strengths or manage your weaknesses in some of these things. So, if you've got really bad planning skills, you're a good dreamer and idea maker, but not such a good planner. Well, then you should hire a planner, right? That's something that you want to build into your organizational structure. So these kind of attributes are things that you need to think about at the very least in your organization. What type of people do you need? So what I'd like you to do as the second discussion activity from that perspective is to consider the management requirements discussed above, and then imagine an established business that you own. Develop a human resource plan that defines the key people in the organization and lists the roles. For each person, consider how you would best lead, control, and communicate with them. So again, you've designed in the first part up above what I've said, this one here, put together an organizational structure. Next, I want you to think about, okay, what are some of the attributes that those people who are in those roles need to have in order to do that? And if you put yourself in the top role, let's assume you put yourself in the head manager's role, what are some of the things that you feel that you can do well? What are some of the things that you feel that you could use some support on? And who are the people that you would bring into your organization in order to give you that support and be successful? What I'd like you to do now is to consider those things this week and to put them into discussion posting. Now, in order to put it into discussion, just to be clear so that you guys are absolutely aware of how to do this. Let me just go to the course. Here's the content right here, allocating human resources that we've looked at this evening. As you move through it, you will see the items here, for example, under designing an organizational structure. Okay, what we talked about, and within that, it's a little slow to come up. Okay, within that, there is this thing, and within that, there's the first grade discussion activity. Okay, it's just like I showed you there. In order to go to the discussion, what you need to do is go up to the discussions right here under communication, and you will find in there this discussion activity right here. You take it and you basically can start a new thread and you can type. Now what I do is I cut and paste it. I type it up somewhere and then I start a new thread, I go and copy it out of somewhere and I paste it in right here.